Hong Kong lawmakers gives government more power. Rare protest in Cuba as economic crisis deepens. South Korea suspends licenses of 2 senior doctors over walkout. Gaza's entire population facing acute food insecurity. Bank of Japan ends the world's only negative rates regime. Xiaomi aims to join Tesla among top 3 luxury EVs in China.
Hello, I'm Wei Li. Thank you for joining us on Funday News. It is Wednesday, March 20th, and here are your top stories. On Tuesday, Hong Kong lawmaker passed a new national security law that grants more power to the government to squash dissent. It is widely seen as the latest step in a sweeping political crackdown that was triggered by pro-democracy protests in 2019. The legislator passed the Safeguarding National Security Bill during a special session that lasted on Tuesday. It comes on top of a similar law imposed by Beijing 4 years ago, which has already largely silenced opposition voices in the financial hub. Hong Kong's Legislative Council, which is packed with Beijing loyalists following an electoral overhaul, expedited the process.
A swift passage for Article 23, a new bill granting Hong Kong authorities yet more power to quash dissent.
Since the bill was unveiled on March 8th, a committee held daily meetings for a week. Following an appeal by Hong Kong leader John Lido pushed the law through at full speed. The law threatens stringent penalties for a wide range of actions authorities call threats to national security, with the most severe, including treason and insurrection, punishable by life imprisonment. Lesser offenses, including the possession of seditious publications, could also lead to several years in jail. Some provisions allow criminal prosecutions for acts committed anywhere in the world. After the voting, Lee announced at the council's chamber that the law would take effect on Saturday.
Hundreds of protesters took to the streets Sunday in Cuba's second-largest city, Santiago, demanding food and power amid a worsening economic crisis that has left many everyday Cubans with scarce amount of each. In widely circulated videos on social media, Cubans in Santiago in the east can be heard chanting, "We are hungry," as well as calling for electricity and food. Some residents have experienced power outages for 18 hours a day or more. Although there has been occasional outbreaks of protests in the past few years, they are still rare on the tightly controlled communist-run island.
Cuba has been grappling with a severe economic crisis, with shortages of food, medicine, fuel, and power. Inflation has risen sharply, making many products unaffordable for Cubans who depend on an average monthly state salary of $16. Cuba has been under-punishing U.S. sanctions for decades, which the Cuban government largely blames for their economic woes. According to economists, the country's Soviet-style, centrally planned economy has also affected Cuba's economy negatively. Cuba recently took some austerity measures, including a steep hike in the price of gasoline, which has left people nervous. The U.S. and Cuba, which continue to have a tense relationship, have had a back and forth over the demonstrations, with Cuba blaming the U.S. for fueling them.
One of the doctors said on Monday that South Korean authorities are set to suspend the licenses of 2 senior doctors accused of inciting week-long walkouts by medical interns and residents that disturb hospital operations. The impending suspensions are the punishment against physicians after more than 90% of the country's 13,000 doctors in training walked off the job last month to protest the government's plan to sharply increase medical school admissions. Officials say the recruitment plan is aimed at adding more doctors to prepare for South Korea's rapidly aging population in a country whose doctor-to-population ratio is one of the lowest in the developed world.
But doctors say schools can't handle an abrupt, steep increase in students, and that it would ultimately undermine the country's medical services. In early March, the government began taking steps to suspend the licenses of striking junior doctors after they refused its orders to return to work by the end of February. About 12,000 junior doctors have been off the job for a month, but none has received a license suspension. The striking junior doctors account for less than 10% of South Korea's 140,000 doctors. However, in some major hospitals, they represent about 30% to 40% of the doctors, assisting senior doctors during surgeries and dealing with inpatients while training.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Gaza's 2 million people are experiencing severe levels of acute food insecurity. This was the first time an entire population had been so classified, he said when questioned by the BBC about conditions in the territory. Mr. Blinken called on Israel to prioritize providing for those in need. UN agencies have said North Gaza could face famine by May without a pause in the fighting and a surge in aid. Mr. Blinken's warning came during a trip to the Philippines as U.S. officials announced that he would travel to the Middle East, his sixth trip to the region since October, as efforts to secure a ceasefire continues.
Israeli negotiators are due to begin talks in Qatar on Tuesday in a fresh attempt to agree a deal with Hamas to halt the fighting, get humanitarian aid in, and Israeli hostages out. Acute food insecurity is when a person's inability to consume adequate food puts their life or livelihood in immediate danger. If unaddressed, it leads to starvation. Mr. Blinken added, "We also see again, according to in this case the United Nations, 100% the totality of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance." He also added, "Compare that to Sudan. About 80% of the population there is in need of humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan, about 70%. So, again, this only underscores both the urgency, the imperative, of making this the priority."
Japan's central bank raised interest rates on Tuesday for the first time since 2007, ending the world's last negative rate regime on early signs of robust wage gain this year. According to its statement at the end of its two-day March policy meeting, the BOJ raised its short-term interest rates to around 0 to 0.1% from negative 0.1%. Japan's negative rate regime has been in place since 2016. The BOJ also announced the abolition of its radical yield curve control policy for 10-year Japanese government bonds, which the central bank has employed to target long-term interest rates by buying and selling bonds as necessary.
The BOJ said it would stop purchases of exchange-traded funds and Japan Real Estate Investment Trusts, J-REITs, and will slowly reduce its purchases of corporate bonds, aiming to stop this practice in about a year. The BOJ will, however, continue its purchases of Japanese government bonds with broadly the same amount as before. This represents the sharpest pullback in its decades-old radical policy tinkering in the form of asset purchases and quantitative easing to reflate the world's fourth-largest economy. The BOJ had barely budged from its ultra-loose monetary policy posture despite core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, exceeding its 2% target for more than a year, because policymakers viewed price increases as largely imported.
Xiaomi Corp declared its ambition for its maiden SU7 to become one of China's 3 best-selling luxury electric vehicle models, sounding a challenge to Tesla Inc. and other rivals in an increasing crowded market. President Liu Weibing cited that internal targets for the SU7, which goes on sale March 28th, is one of Xiaomi's more concrete projections yet for its multi-billion-dollar foray into the world's largest EV market. Xiaomi's first EV will test both its technological capabilities and a market that's experiencing a price war and sagging sales growth.
Xiaomi will get help from a slowly recovering smartphone arena. On Tuesday, the company reported a better-than-expected 11% rise in revenue after a surprisingly strong 21% surge in smartphone sales. Net income rose 50%, also beating projections. The results are a welcome boost for Xiaomi as co-founder Lei Jun prepares to launch his biggest bet in years, a costly effort to break into a Chinese EV market dominated by Tesla and BYD company. Xiaomi is slated to sell its first EV more than 2 years after the billionaire entrepreneur announced what he's called his final major endeavor. Xiaomi, which plans a gala launch for the new car, mostly skirted the issue of its EV ambitions in Tuesday's results filing. But Lei shared on Weibo, a Twitter-like social media service, that Xiaomi's directors had visited its car plant and test-driven the vehicle.
The answer for yesterday was B, orchestrated. Officials say the attack was orchestrated by a militant group. Did you answer correctly? Now let's delve into the news of Xiaomi aims to join Tesla among top 3 luxury EVs in China. Number 1, rival, 竞争对手. The two teams have always been rivals. Number 2, projection, 预测,推断,设想. Sales have exceeded our projections. Number 3, capability, 能力,才能. Animals in the zoo have lost the capability to catch or of catching food for themselves. Next, we have a multiple choice question for everyone to practice. Which answer would you choose? You can write your answer in the comment section. The correct answer will be announced tomorrow. And that's it for today's Funday News. Be sure to tune into Funday News from Monday to Friday and click the link below to join Funday for free. I'm Wade Lee, your host. I'll see you next time.